do have quorum as we recognize Councilmember Fry and Councilmember Blubog, who are joining us remotely. With that, we'll call the meeting to order. For the invocation, we will recognize Pastor Brent Walkington of the First MB Church, and we would ask people if they're willing and able to stand for the invocation, followed immediately by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pastor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear Jesus, we thank you for our great city that we so much enjoy being a part of. I thank you for our city council members. I pray for unity. I pray for wisdom. These are difficult days, so grant them what they need. I also want to pray for all those that are struggling with the cold and the homeless, and we're thankful for those who are providing services. So in all of this, we do want to express our gratitude despite the challenges of life, and we do ask that you would work and help our city to flourish. And I pray this in Jesus' name, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk.
Approval of the minutes of the regular meeting on February 9th, 2021.
Has every member had a chance to review the minutes? And if so, is there any suggestions or discussion of the minutes? Seeing none, I will make a motion to accept the minutes as printed. Is there a second?
Second.
Very good. Seconded by Councilmember Tuttle. If there is no discussion on the motion, clerk will open the roll. Members cast the votes. With the result of, we got 2 thumbs up, I think. With the result of it's taken me a second to count these. It's not because I'm waiting on Johnson to come and cast his vote, so he doesn't have to miss a vote today.
Okay.
Councilmember Johnson votes aye. So with the result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, it passes unanimous. Madam Clerk.
Under proclamation, Black History Month.
Proclamation of the City of Wichita, Kansas, founded in 1870 in recognition of Black History Month. Whereas during Black History Month, we celebrate the many achievements and contributions made by African Americans to our economic, culture, spiritual, and political development. And whereas in 1915, Dr. Carter Goodwin Woodson, noted Black scholar and son of former slaves, founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, which was later renamed the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And whereas in 1976, as part of the nation's bicentennial Black History Week was expanded and became established as Black History Month and is now celebrated all over North America. And whereas the City of Wichita is proud to honor the history and contributions of African Americans in our community throughout our state and nation. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Brandon Whipple, Mayor of the City of Wichita, Kansas, along with the Wichita City Council, do hereby proclaim February 2021 as Black History Month in the City of Wichita and urge all citizens to celebrate our diverse heritage and culture and continue our efforts to create a world that is more just, peaceful, and prosperous for all. Madam Clerk.
Under the public agenda, Celeste Rossette, Developments in Wichita.
Madam Clerk, Celeste reached out and stated that she would be unable to attend because of her, I believe a family member had a pipe burst emergency, and she asked to be placed on the next public agenda.
Okay.
Madam Clerk.
Consent agenda items 1 through 11.
Has every member had a chance to review the consent agenda? If so, is there any discussion on the consent agenda? If there is no discussion, then I will make a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded by the Vice Mayor. No discussion on the motion. Members will cast their vote. Councilmember Bluebock has a thumbs up, as does Councilmember Fry. Let the clerk record 6-0 for yeas in the affirmative. Madam Clerk.
Petitions for public improvements.
Welcome. Good morning.
Morning, Mayor and Council members. Gary Jansen, Public Works Engineering. The item before you this morning is our initial request for approval of public petitions in a manner different than we had done in the past. On February 2nd, City Council approved a modification to normal council business and the weekly agenda to allow this item to be placed on the agenda each week for approval of new petitions. And I spoke then, and I might just remind the council again too, our previous process where every new petition was presented to the council as a specific consent agenda item usually took around 5 weeks for approval. It had a pretty significant impact on development schedules, being able to get projects out on time. This process will allow approval of new petitions in as little as 1 week. So we're excited to be doing this today. This will be an item again on the City Council agenda every week, assuming that there are new petitions ready for approval. So with that, there's two things that happens why this works. We think this works well is that these petitions include signatures representing 100% of the improvement district on every single one. So one more quick reminder, if we have a petition that is less than 100% of the improvement district, that will still come to the City Council as a new business item. And all petitions are validated by our law department per Kansas statute. With that, moving on today for the petitions for approval. The first ones are revised petitions for Auburn Lakes Edition, which is north of Kellogg, east of 135th Street West. The developer submitted revised petitions to modify the lot configurations to meet current market conditions for water, paving, and sanitary sewer improvements. And I'll just make one more quick comment about this process. In particular, for revised petitions is where this process really helps, because even with low interest rates and still being a big demand for residential housing, the market continues to fluctuate on demand in certain areas, price points for housing. And so we see revised petitions come in really late in the development process, even after letter of credit submitted, and the developer would like to see these items be approved, certainly in less than 5 weeks. So this allows us to do that. New petitions then before you today include True Building Edition, which is south of Maple and east of Julia, for water and sanitary sewer improvements required for new commercial development. Also for Dorothy Edition, which is north of I-235 south and east of West Street. The petitions before you today were originally part of a requirement of the original plat and will allow paving of Calvert along the sidewalk. The last new petition before you today is Firefly Way, 2nd edition, south of 29th Street North, west of 127th Street East. Petitions required for water, sanitary sewer, and paving for residential development. With that, staff requests that City Council approve the revised and new petitions and budgets, adopt amending resolutions, authorize the necessary signatures, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Are there questions on the item? Councilmember Clayco.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. I just want to say, Gary, thanks for streamlining this process. I know we thanked you last time, but I think, today we saw the fruits of your efforts, so really appreciate that. I think this also makes it, in my estimation, easier for council to look at those as opposed to having a whole stack of items to look at. We can see them all in one list, and I think it makes it easier for the public in that we actually go through these projects and don't have them in consent without people having to pull them. So thank you again for those efforts.
Further discussion? See none. With that, I will just check to make sure there's no No one has entry to for this item. Okay, so with that, I will make a motion to accept staff's recommended action to approve the petitions and budgets, adopt the resolutions, and authorize the necessary signatures. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded by the Vice Mayor. Clerk will open a roll. Members cast the votes. It looks like Councilmember Fry and Councilmember Bluebog vote aye, which means that the ayes are 6 to 0. Madam Clerk.
Public hearing considering approval of development agreement and adoption of a project plan for the Riverside infrastructure project.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council. Mark Elder here with the Office of Economic Development. The item before you today is consideration to both adopt a project plan for the redevelopment of the Riverside infrastructure project as well as a development agreement associated with development of that project. This process on the developer side began in 2019, where they began assembling land for their site. They also cleared that site in 2019. This is primarily due to neighborhood and safety concerns that included blight, unauthorized camping, neighborhood kids hiding in unsafe areas, as well as just general unsafe conditions. The developer over time did revise their initial plans that began with the tower-style apartments, but they revised that to be just 40 homes that following multiple meetings with the neighborhood. This design is also a little more consistent with the Riverside areas as well as some of the MAPC plans. With this, the developer started this process with the land here in red. That was privately purchased from a private owner to begin this process. But while the developer was working on their plans for how they would develop it, they proposed to the city a transfer of land between the yellow land, which was originally owned by the city, and the blue triangle at the very top of the red there that was owned by the developer. That was a trade. It was approximately just about 10 feet difference between those two lands, but they traded that to make the development a little more developable, as well as provide land to the city that was a little more usable for park or other land uses. With that transaction, there's also $15,000 paid to the city for that transaction, so that the land square footage was relatively the same, but the city also, park department received $15,000. And starting in 2019, the developer had at least 6 different meetings with the neighborhood and the neighbors in the area to work through this plan, to have discussions on what they were looking at, but also get the neighbors' feedback to get their involvement in this, and as well as get their support for the project going forward. In 2020 is when the city adopted a TIF redevelopment district to begin the process to help with this project moving forward. The project was the redevelopment of the land that the developer owns, but it also included the river path as well as the trailhead at the north end of the project for this. The boundaries are a lot easier seen here, where it's Amidon on the east, McLean on the west, and it follows the river and the bike path up to 13th Street with Central Avenue on the south. This district, and it's also the project area, allows for the city to use those TIF funds for those bike path and pedestrian path improvements that include the lights and other improvements along the river. A little more focused on where the majority of the project will be occurring, these are areas where in red the developer will be doing those approximately 40 homes. And the yellow there is a trailhead, which is proposed for this development. And then the blue is the rest of the river, where we'll be making those additional improvements to the bike path, the lighting, and possible riverbank improvements. This project, the overall area is approximately 90 acres. Of that, about 7.8 acres are for the private development that will be providing the TIF funding that makes these improvements. With that, the project will include approximately 40 patio homes in the developer's project, but it will also include infrastructure supporting that development that will be funded both through special assessment and tax increment financing, riverbank and river path improvements, as well as the trailhead for the path north of the development. The TIF proposed improvements, it's a total budget of about 1.7 million in TIF eligible improvements. That's $700,000 for infrastructure that supports the development that will be guaranteed by the developer, and $1 million that will be used for both the trailhead for the path as well as the river path improvements. Now, with tax increment financing, you have two ways you can fund those. That is through the issuance of tax increment financing bonds as well as pay-as-you-go. This project is split where there is it's at this time proposed to use $725,000 of tax increment financing bonds to fund both the $700,000 in infrastructure for the project, as well as $25,000 for the trailhead entrance and parking. All of those bonds will be guaranteed by the developer. The overall TIF project plan has a capacity to issue $1.4 million in TIF bonds, but at this time, the $725,000 is what's proposed for the project. The remainder of the TIF financing, $975,000, will be used pay-as-you-go. So as revenue comes in that exceeds the amount necessary for those TIF bonds, the city can use those to make those additional improvements, which include the riverbank, the path, and the trailhead. Now on to the development agreement. The developer will agree to construct approximately 40 zero-line patio homes, as well as a minimum of 10 parking stalls to serve that city-owned trailhead on the north. They will invest approximately a little over $8 million for the construction and development of the project, but they'll also meet certain milestones in the process, including commencing construction within 90 days of the effective date of the agreement. But they'll also have substantial completion within 26 months of when they commence construction of the project. For the city side of the agreement, they will use up to $700,000 in TIF bonds from the revenues generated to help defray those costs of the sanitary, sewer, stormwater, and lift station associated with the developer's project, and also create a special assessment benefit district for $975,000 of the additional site infrastructure, including streets and storm sewer. The construction of this trailhead entrance and parking cost of $25,000 will be also funded up front through the TIF bonds, but also guaranteed by the developer. The additional improvements to the path, light, and trailhead will be used as additional TIF revenue becomes available, up to the $975,000 identified in the project plan. There's a little table to help break down a little bit more cleanly what's being proposed. You see here there's $9 million for the private development, which includes both the construction and the site infrastructure, as well as $1.7 million in tax increment financing split between the site infrastructure and the trail and trailhead. This image here is the proposed developer's project on the south that includes the 40 patio homes, but also has a conceptual park plan just to give people an idea of what could be developed there. This is not the final plan. This is just something to get people talking, and once this project moves forward, there will actually be public outreach through the park department to get the neighborhood's feedback on what they would like to see in this park. Then I just have a few renderings of what is proposed as far as the housing in that area. I believe also that the representatives of the development team may be at Century 2 this morning to answer additional questions, and I will stand for questions as well.
All right, questions of staff. Councilmember Claycomb.
Thank you. Mark, could you please go back to slide 13? It's the map.
This one?
That one will work, because I have a question on this one also, and then we'll go back to the earlier map that shows the land swap.
Okay, yes.
On this one, there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the path and what's going to happen to it. There's some talk that the path is going to become part of the development. And could you explain about city-owned property versus private property?
Correct. The trailhead on the north is city-owned property. There is a street that goes through that serves the trailhead and also has the parking in there, but this is a park department-owned, city-owned project here. And it serves both the neighborhood as well as that path.
All right, and so what we're looking at here is the private property is the darker green with the little yellow houses on there.
Correct. It's a little difficult to see here, but that's the easiest way to see with the line on there that differentiates between those two land areas.
Okay. And then before we go out for public comment, could you please remind people how TIFs work?
So tax increment financing works by taking a base year of the value of land that's being redeveloped, and it locks that in. And then any investment in that area, in that land, any increment in the taxes paid on that based on the fact that there was a development in here, goes to pay for those improvements that are TIF funded. So for instance, if we're receiving $1 in taxes today and we begin receiving $5 in taxes, those $4 from the development go into paying those TIF funded improvements. So we capture the incremental taxes paid to make those improvements, but it does not come from anything wider than what is established within the TIF boundary. So for this project, the funds are strictly coming from this housing development within those boundaries. It does not come from the neighborhood anywhere else.
And why in the some of the maps we show the river and the path in that TIF district? Can you explain that, please?
Oh, yes. So the other part of TIF is that the funds generated within the district can only be used within that district. So therefore, we identified the boundaries that include the river so that we can use those funds that are generated by this housing project to also make improvements to the river, including the bike path. So that's why it goes down to Central and follows the river to include the bike path all the way up north to 13th Street.
Thank you.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson, excuse me, Vice Mayor Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. I had a few questions, but I'm gonna ask the rest of them later. I've seen some questions about this land trade, and looking at the map that you showed, there was some things said, I think, on social media that we were just giving away property, but it looks like we gained property on another side. Was it an equal trade, or did we?
Well, I can have our city's land administrator address that further, but that's why I identified in this map here that there's 34,341 square feet that went to the developer, 34,355 that came to the city. So yes, we netted about 14 square feet, but in addition to that, we received $15,000 to the park department to help with this trailhead as well.
Okay. That was it for now. Thank you.
So the city land that was transferred to dark blue, is that where the playground is projected to go?
That is where the trailhead and the development will go, yes, sir.
So in the other map where the playground is, could you go back to the last map slide? So where it has the playground, the gazebo, that's going to be public? Is that fair?
Correct. And again, the final plans for what the park will look like will be done through neighborhood meetings. But yes, this area up there will all be public area that will be dedicated to a trailhead and park.
Okay. Other discussions on this? Now we will open up to public comment. Oh, Councilmember Bluebog has a hand up. Councilmember.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just wanted to ask a question. Is the Parks Department already allocated a plan here? It doesn't sound like they have, but it does sound like they're going to be responsible for maintaining this park and putting the improvements in that park, in this park. Is that correct?
There is a portion in the agreement that has the developer maintaining the entrance area and the parking during the time that they're within the contract, but over the life of the park, it will transition over to the parks department maintaining that. So
is the city paying for the initial improvements in the park, or is the developer going to pay for that out of the TIF?
The TIF is funding that project, so it comes from the development that the developer is doing. Those taxes will pay for the improvements in the park, up to the amount that's allocated in the project plan.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion from the bench? If not, we will go down to Century 2 to hear public discussion. Welcome, sir. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, am I in the? Good morning, Mayor, City Council, Manager, and City staff. For the record, my name is Barry Carroll. I live at 1134 North Coolidge in the Riverside neighborhood. I'm speaking as a private citizen and not on behalf of any group or organization. I have lived in the Riverside neighborhood for approximately 30 years. I am speaking in support of the proposed River Trail Village development. In an effort to educate myself about this project, I attended a Riverside Citizen Association meeting where I heard a presentation from the developers. I also learned that the developers had modified their proposal based upon feedback from the neighborhood. This will also be what's called an infill development project, which is consistent with city policies. As you may know, I am an advocate for bicycling, walking, and community health. I believe this project will enhance our infrastructure by providing a trailhead and improvements to the river path. Thank you for allowing me to provide my perspective on this important neighborhood housing project. I am asking that you support this proposed River Trail Village housing project. Thanks again.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
One moment, Mayor.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and City Councilman.
Morning.
My name is Bruce Kay, and I was born and raised in Wichita, and about 8 years ago came to live in Riverside. I live in the River Oaks condominiums, and they're about 4 blocks from the castle. I am also an avid cyclist. I ride about 7,000 miles a year, and in doing so, you really get a feel for neighborhoods. You know, cars are going past you that weigh 3,000 to 4,000 pounds more than you do, going twice the speed. And so it's very important for you to know that Riverside has the most considerate and compassionate drivers. And that's the kind of neighborhood that I want to live in. There seems to be kind of a feeling in parts of Riverside, and I think I might call it nostalgia. The idea that if somehow we could just go back to, I don't know, maybe the 80s or the 70s or the 60s, that's when the really good life was. I call that kind of golden age believing. But I want to tell you that is definitely not where I come from. I am excited about right now, about the future of Riverside and Wichita. When I think about Mayor and the Commission, some of the landmark decisions that you've made and your predecessors have made in the last few years, I mean, I love the downtown arena. I love going there to concerts and to sporting events. And if you want to find me this summer, all you got to do is go to Delano, and I'll be in the new baseball stadium. So I am excited about this new project, mainly because I am the most unmechanical person you've ever met. So it's hard for me to be a homeowner in Riverside. I live in a condominium because it has a maintenance person. Something breaks, I call Wayne. He comes and fixes it. But when I saw this new project, here it is on the river, next to a golf course, in the neighborhood that I love, that I want to spend the rest of my life in, man, that's exciting. I know there are a lot of things that will go into your decision, and I know you'll make the right one, but I appreciate the time that I can come up and tell you why I am for this project. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
One moment, Mayor.
Good morning, council members, mayor. Thank you for your time this morning. My name is Brian Blackerby. I live at 1048 North Woodrow in the Riverside neighborhood. My wife and I moved there 2 years ago. We, much like the other speakers, really enjoy that neighborhood for the natural amenities. I am an avid cyclist myself and really enjoy what that neighborhood offers. And so I'm speaking in favor this morning of the development. The way that the developers have approached this project to me are very admirable in that they have come and talked to the Riverside Association numerous times. We all know that this could be a multifamily project that's built on this land, and they have chosen to listen to the neighbors and make a decision that best fits within the community itself, the architectural style, and to really honor what the Riverside neighborhood stands for. And so I appreciate your time this morning and encourage you to vote in favor of this development. Thank you.
All right, do we have more speakers?
We do, Mayor, just one moment.
Good morning, Council, Mayor. My name is Doug Ballard. I live at 920 Buffum. I've lived in the Riverside area since the mid-70s. Moved into the house that I'm living in right now in 79. I'm opposed to the project and the TIF. I'm really not sure where to start here, but the poured on a slab construction, 7 feet apart with a homeowners association. That's just rental property to me. And since I have lived in Riverside, I live on Buffum. Buffum and Faulkner are much wider streets than all of the other streets. And because the city, I'll just blame it on them, has done such a poor job of giving people that have moved northwest a way to get back to downtown, which they're trying to develop now. They use Faulkner and Buffum for a cut across. So, and I know I could talk for ever on this subject, but at one time in the mid-70s, the RCA proposed closing Buffum on the north and Faulkner on the south, and it just split the neighborhood terribly. So I suggested when I was RCA president of possibly having the speed limit in the park go down to 15 miles an hour. I thought that would maybe take traffic off of NIMS, which is way overly traveled. They had to put a stoplight down in there at Stackman or whatever that is, Central, extension of Central. So I know this is somewhat off the subject, but this is why I'm opposed to the property, that kind of construction. I would never be for poured on a slab. You used to not be able to do that. But anyway, Council Member Claycomb, I saw the 19-minute video that to me looked like a campaign ad. So, and how many times can you say the word sticker patch? I'm also a bicyclist, and I ride the river corridor almost every day. Not today, but most days. And the best 500 feet of the bike path is the 500 feet from 13th Street up towards Sims. That's the best part of the path. So I don't know if it needs anything. And the trailhead part that you're talking about, people right now, they use the parking lot across the street from the Art Museum Indian Center, and they also use the spillway. There's a little park up there. That's where people go, unload their bikes, get on the bike path. So what my problem, well, the TIF deal is the whole thing. We have recently found out that those TIFs do not work very well, and there's no accountability to this. So I'm afraid for me, this project is a combination of the NASCAR Park Stryker Field, Meads Corner, the Samaritan Center, the Shirkmere, the 316 building, Delano, all of the apartments going in there, Lawrence Stadium, the area around there. And I want to encourage all of you to represent the people that live in your area, not just the ones that donate to your campaign, because that's what it looks like to me. I know this is like a jigsaw puzzle. I hear things here, see things there. Most of you know that I've been an activist for a long, long time, and so I have a lot of sources. I don't have any proof, but I have a lot of information that makes me doubt this project as well as many others. Also, as far as the people that, and I don't know this, so I'm accusing somebody of something that I really don't know. I don't believe the owner that they bought the property from had ever had any intentions of developing the property. So I want to encourage you to, you guys are supposed to be working on your accountability and the trust, and this is just another one. So I encourage you to not allow this tip to go through. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
One moment, Mayor.
Good morning,
Morning.
Mayor.
Welcome. You have
City
5
Council.
minutes.
City Council members. My name is Jerry Jones, 2038 North Gow, and I'm representing the developers, the development team of this project. We are now referring to this project as River Trail Village. So we think that the name is indicative and reflective of this area and what's going on. And as you heard, every speaker this morning said they are cyclists. And so that's one of the reasons that we initially became interested in this property. Our team are cyclists, and we ride by this property all the time. And to answer the question from the gentleman before me, we bought this property from a business owner from Texas, and who owned and operated as a juvenile psychiatric facility. So it was privately owned, and for us, the prior tenant was our tenant until they decided not to continue with their lease. So I know there's been a lot of questions about that, and in fact, when they moved out, we, with our own money, paid to take that building down because it did become an eyesore and a source of a lot of problems for that neighborhood. But now we're looking forward to developing River Trail Village. We think it's going to offer a very nice housing option for people who would like to live in Riverside in a new home. There have been many voices that have participated in this process to get here today, and most of them have been very positive and given us a lot of encouragement about this project. We think the TIF improvements will be a benefit not only for the neighborhood, but for the entire community that uses the river trail. And I just want to make a final statement that we appreciate the leadership of our council. You have a very difficult job. You show up every day working for the benefit of the community, and I just want to say thank you for that. And I'd stand for any questions you might have.
Vice Mayor Johnson, do you have a question? Or,
Yep.
Vice Mayor Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. Mr. Jones, I had a couple questions for you. Starting with the last speaker mentioned that these would be rental units. Could you clarify, are these homes for rent or for sale?
These homes are single-family, detached patio homes. They will be for sale. As one of the speakers mentioned, maintenance will be provided. And so there will be a homeowners association that will collect dues that will pay for the maintenance of this small neighborhood village.
Okay. The previous speaker also mentioned that these were pour-on slabs, and I think Habitat for Humanity does that as well. Could you speak to the quality of house that would be?
Right. These will be very nice homes. You noticed in the project plan, the estimated construction cost of these homes will probably be in the market of $300,000 per home. And the slab on grade really has more to do with the target market. These homes will be marketed not exclusively to, but certainly primarily towards empty nesters, and they will have a lot of zero entry features. And the type of people who want to buy these homes typically don't need a basement.
Awesome. All right, one more question. And speaking with Councilmember Claycomb before and reading through the notes today, there were 6 meetings from the community. What made you change the original proposed plan to what we see now?
I would just say that going into this development, we felt it was a nice piece of property, 7.5 acres in the Riverside area, next to the golf course on the river, and had zoning for multifamily development. This is the type of development that we are accustomed to doing. We weren't in a hurry to do that. We had a tenant that was paying rent for the existing building. And as we started going into the neighborhood meetings, we found resistance to that type of development. And we decided that, especially when our tenant left and we were left with a dilapidated building that ended up being a nuisance, it just seemed to be the best thing to move forward with this project was to do single family housing.
Thank you.
So I have a question about the neighborhood association meetings. What was the general consensus after you adapted your plans from the members of the neighborhood association in regard to if they supported this or not?
The association did not take a vote, and we heard positive feedback and negative feedback, and I think we listened to both and adjusted our plans accordingly. But I would say the consensus of the people at the meetings was positive.
So you believe that the majority of the people at the meetings for the neighborhood association were in support, or at least didn't voice, a majority didn't voice non-support?
Correct.
Further questions? Thank you, sir.
Do we have another speaker? All right, thanks, Jerry. Mayor, that's all the speakers we have on this item.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion on this item? Jeff, excuse me, Councilmember Bluebog, you had your thumb up. I think you need the floor, though, not the vote. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to ask staff, have we ever done a project like this where we've used a TIF for residential development? I think the answer is no, but where I'm going with the question is, if we approve this today, is this something that we're setting precedent on that we would look at possibly doing to help take care of older infrastructure in the city? I know we've got a lot of aging water, sewer pipes, sidewalks, and streets in some older neighborhoods. Is this potentially a tool that the city could use if we do approve this?
It could be, yes. It's one of those where as long as the area we're looking at meets the other criteria and a proposal comes forward that meets the financial needs and can provide the increment financing we need for the infrastructure as well, it's something that the council could consider. But TIF projects are unique enough that it would just be a case-by-case review, but it does create the possibility for it.
Vice Mayor Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. One quick question. One of the speakers mentioned that there is a lack of accountability on the proposed TIF. Could you explain what that accountability is?
I'm not quite sure what the lack of accountability is. The finance department provides financial status reports in all of their budget reports. And staff has an annual report that has been coming out the last few years as well on those.
I shouldn't have said, can you tell me what the lack of can you tell me what the accountability is? Bob said.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think Mr. Ballard, when he was making his comment on the TIF, was talking about, frankly, our older TIF policy. And as Mark indicated, the developer has guaranteed the TIF bonds that are not pay-as-you-go, and therefore, if there's not sufficient increment generated by the project, the developer will be responsible for the debt service on these bonds. And that's a tool that or a safeguard that we didn't have in place in the early years of TIF, but we have done that since 2009.
And so pay-as-you-go means we won't give any money until they pay money?
It has to be received, correct.
Okay.
Further questions or discussion? Councilmember Claycomb.
I don't have any questions. I'm just ready to make a motion if,
I don't think
unless
that
anyone
there's
else.
any discussion, so I think your timing as well.
Thank you. I also want to mention that each of us received an email through the public comment section of council meeting at wichita.gov. That should be in all of the council members' email box this morning. It's from Deb and Lisa Cushing, who sent, again, their public comments through that process in support of the project. They live right across the street from the project. I won't read Deb and Lisa's comments, but again, they are in support, and the council members can read those. I want to thank all the people that spoke today on this project. I recognize that there have been concerns about this project. I have attended many neighborhood meetings, as Mark talked about, and even as late as last week, I attended the Riverside Citizens Association neighborhood meeting in person, and it was live streamed on Facebook. There have been a lot of people working in the community and city staff who have worked on this for a long time. I want to thank those who attended the 7+ meetings that really resulted in a much better development, both aesthetically and density-wise. As Mr. Jones pointed out, they went in with a much denser project. I also really appreciate the meaningful and thoughtful contributions that the neighbors in that community made. Despite some misinformation that continues about this project, which I hope we were able to take care of today, council couldn't stop this project. It's a private transaction between two private entities. This was not city property. We, I think, are getting some good amenities out of this. The development, though, is allowed by zoning on privately owned land. I think it's a really good example of what we can expect from our Places for People plan and our urban infill strategy, which I think Councilmember Blubaugh was alluding to. Thank you, Mark, for explaining what a TIF is. That was one of my questions. And the TIF benefits the city and all the residents who will use the Trailhead Park, the path, and the improvements along that path. A vote against this TIF item today is a vote against funding for the infrastructure, the Trailhead Park, the improvements to the trail. It is not a vote against the development or the look of the homes. A vote against this item today will ensure that the neighborhood will not get the Trailhead Park and the improvements to the trail, and possibly could get a denser development built there on this site. For example, as much as a 5-story apartment tower with 500 units could be built. So with that, I move to close the public hearing and place on first reading the ordinances adopting the project plan and development agreement.
I just want a clarification for the comment that was made by the manager. If this doesn't go forward, does the city still pay for the sewer lift?
Mayor, that'll be financed through the TIF.
So the developer does get something for this. If this doesn't move forward, the TIF isn't just about the park and the trailhead, and the developer actually does receive something for this TIF. Is that a correct statement?
The public improvements that are outlined in the staff report, that's correct, and Mark can go through those, but that includes a sanitary sewer system.
Okay, and so if this didn't move forward, the developer would have to pay for the sanitary sewer system moving forward. Is that correct?
Through the TIF.
Through the TIF. If this TIF doesn't go forward.
If the TIF, I'm sorry, if the TIF doesn't go forward, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. It's open for a second.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded by the Vice Mayor. There's no discussion on the motion. Clerk will open a roll. Members cast the vote. Councilmember Fry?
Yes.
Sorry, you're frozen on my screen. I see you in there as a yes, but
Yes.
it's just your, yeah, sorry. With the result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Biological nutrient removal program.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, sir.
Member of Council, Alan King, Director of Public Works and Utilities. I have with me today Patrick Young with HDR. They're one of the team members of the Phase 1 design, and he's going to help me today with the presentation and to provide some more detailed information on the treatment processes and answer any questions that you might have. So today what we would like to do is to provide an overview of the biological nutrient removal program to give you an idea about where we're at and what the work has been behind the scenes up until now. We've developed a couple of options for your consideration. Also like to lay out what the projected timeline looks like, to review again what the funding would be needed for this project, and then also provide a recommended path forward. The whole biological nutrient removal requirement, or BNR, comes out of the city's permit through KDHE that is also meets EPA requirements for treatment levels that must be met before the discharge is made into the Arkansas River. They're on a 5-year cycle. There's a new requirement that's coming up in our permits that's going to require reducing nitrogen and phosphorus in our discharge. That's what we mean by nutrient. Those are the kinds of chemicals that promote algal growth. And so what we have to do to meet these future requirements is to change our treatment process, and that's what this whole BNR project is about. This effort starts back in a plan, our integrated water and sewer plan that we updated back in 2016. We've also identified some initial estimates, capital investments for the project with the idea, and included it in our CIP. It was $1 million for an evaluation and concept, the part of the process that we're in right now, with a 2024 to 2028 $355 million for design and construction. So as you can see, this represents a significant investment by the city in its sewer or wastewater infrastructure. Back on January of 2020, of last year, we made a presentation of the plan on how we wanted to proceed meeting this BNR requirement. We also had a city council meeting back on July 7th of last year to bring you an engineering services agreement for the Phase 1 design. That's the process that we're in right now. And then as late as December 15th, 2020, we also brought a contract for you that you approved for owner's advisor agreement, which was outside independent consulting services to represent the city's interest while the design and construction of this project goes on. When we talk about the sewer system, the wastewater collection system, we have 5 treatment plants. Plants 1, 2, and 5 are what we call hydraulically connected. One flows into another. And then we also have 2 other treatment plants, 3 and plant 4, that are hydraulically isolated from the rest of the system. They already meet the BNR requirements, but the portion of our system that goes, that's represented by treatment plants 1, 2, and 5 do not yet, and that's the scope of this project, is to make improvements to meet the BNR requirements for this part of our system. Basically what I just said, they're hydraulically connected 1, 2, and 5, and that 3 and 4 operate independently and already meet the BNR requirement. So the first part of the study that we've been conducting was to do a condition assessment and a capacity review, how much hydraulically and biologically could be handled by our various facilities, and then also to look at the different pipelines that connect these facilities and other assets. The master plan that I talked about earlier, there were 5 scenarios about how we could achieve BNR compliance, and there was a 6th one added that we could consider that came to light after the master plan was done. So we actually evaluated all 6 scenarios and came up with the top 3. But when you look at the facilities, you also have to look at the possible treatment processes at those facilities. And when you do that, that comes up with 25 different possible configurations of those top 3. What we did was we evaluated those 25 different configurations and used a process called decision space pairwise to evaluate them using economic and non-economic criteria. So the 3 scenarios, scenario 1 was plant 1 was plant 2, which is 36 million gallons a day BNR, and plant 5 at 6 million gallons a day BNR. We'll talk a little bit about what these abbreviations mean. Plant scenario 2 was to go ahead and do the full 42 million gallons a day BNR at that treatment plant and make no improvements to plant 5. And then scenario 6 was to do the same as scenario 1, only a different amount of BNR treatment at the plant 5. So when we looked at the treatment processes, we did a review of the applicable treatment processes. We looked at current and future regulatory requirements. We anticipate that these nutrient removal requirements will get more stringent into the future, and we wanted to be aware that whatever we considered was forward-looking and could accommodate to the extent possible these future anticipated requirements. We also needed to look at our existing assets and their condition, and to look at any way that we could take care of aging infrastructure at the same time we were taking care of this biological nutrient removal. We also looked at the type of characteristics of the sewage that was coming into our system and the flows coming into our system. I'd like to pause at this point and bring Patrick Young up to the podium and have him talk a little bit about the types of treatment processes that were evaluated. This is not only to give you an idea about what kind of processes we're evaluating, but also to show you that we really looked long and hard. We had a thorough look at these various processes. So with that, Patrick, you come up, please.
So Alan talked about the need to remove both phosphorus and total nitrogen from the system. And we looked at 3 different processes at Plant 2 that can do that. And the first one is called the A2O process. And what we do in this process is we actually add volume to your treatment system, allows us to add biomass to treat the waste, and we do it creating environments that allow us to degrade the different constituents. For example, in that anaerobic zone in the A2O process, we use that to degrade phosphorus. The anoxic zone we use to degrade total nitrogen, and then the oxic zone, or the aerated zone, is what you currently have today. We're degrading ammonia, which is a part of total nitrogen, and BOD. Conversely, so if you look at that system, we're adding volume and biomass. We're adding concrete and tankage and the cost of doing that. Conversely, the 2 other systems, the MABR and the MOB, Instead of adding all of this volume and tankage, we add media to the existing tank, create the same environments that I talked about, and what we do is that media allows us to grow additional biomass in a smaller volume. So basically, we're looking at an alternative 1, adding tankage and concrete, and alternatives 2 and 3, we're adding media to it to get to the same basic end result. In addition, at Plant 2, we looked at what's called side stream treatment. And as you treat wastewater in a treatment plant, you have recycle streams within the plant. Some of those recycle streams have very concentrated waste in them that must be removed in the liquid treatment process. And what we do with side stream is we actually treat that concentrated recycle stream. So in the case of this side stream nitrogen removal, we add a little capital cost to the project, but we save you dollars on the operation of that facility moving forward. So you'll kind of see the end results of that as Alan continues with that presentation. Then at Plant 5, we had a little different, unique set of characteristics or criteria. Plant 5 is really landlocked, and we don't have a lot of room to add additional tankage. So we had to look at a couple of different unit processes at Plant 5 that would fit within the existing tanks at that facility. And they're both called aerobic granular sludge, or AGS, and membrane bioreactor, which is what that plant is today. We looked at rehabbing and ultimately expanding that facility. So a couple different treatment technologies that, again, allow us to create enough biomass to treat that waste in that existing footprint. And with that, I can handle any questions you have related to treatment if you have them at this time.
Councilmember Johnson, Vice Mayor Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. So I'm trying to keep up with Plant 2. So were you saying that these all 3 of those alternatives will be considered, or you were looking at each one like individually for that?
All 3 were considered. So when Alan talked about 25 total sets of criteria, it's combinations of AO2 with side stream or AO2 without side stream, and then those different treatment capacities. So Alan talked about either having 36, 39, or 42 immediate capacity. So we applied these different technologies at these different flow rates to come up with those 25 total different scenarios that were looked at.
Okay, and then this is jarring a little bit. I did a little bit of this type of work prior to being on council, and I remember one thing about the membrane. Is that more efficient than what we're doing now with adding ammonia, or?
You know, for the membrane, the way we're actually applying that at Plant 2 is you actually bring oxygen up through that membrane. It diffuses into the biomass itself. And it's a very, very, very efficient form of getting that oxygen into the system. So it's very efficient from that perspective, but you then have to offset that with the cost of those individual membranes. But you are correct, that's how we're applying that within that system.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Clayco.
Thank you. Could you explain the side stream process one more time, please?
Sure. On side stream, what we have is when we treat the liquid side at a treatment plant, we create biosolids. Then we thicken those biosolids and we get rid of them. As we thicken them, you remove part of the water, which has a load in it that comes back to that liquid treatment side. So instead of letting that concentrated load come back to the liquid and treating it as the liquid, we actually grab it as a recycle stream and treat it there. And because it's at a higher concentration, we can use different treatment processes to treat it at that higher concentration. So we basically take that opportunity, since it's in a concentrated form, to be able to treat it there. Like I said, it adds some additional capital to the project, but your operating costs are diminishedly reduced to treat that side stream waste. So we looked at this both with and without that side stream.
Thank you.
Further questions? Further discussion? We will recognize, I think there's a couple speakers over at Century 2 who would like to speak to this item.
Mr. Mayor, we still have some presentation left.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Sorry about that.
Went quiet for a moment. I thought we were getting into discussion after getting a couple folks' questions, so my apologies.
Well, no, my apologies for not being more clear, sir. So we also, at the same time, we were considering these different treatment processes. So as you can see from Patrick's presentation, we were very thorough at looking at all different possibilities. One of the things we also did to reduce the risk of, to make sure we get this right, is we actually conducted some pilot projects testing different treatment processes on our own sewage stream and using our own equipment. Not only did that give us better confidence in the technologies that we were considering, but it also looked at ways, gave us an opportunity to look at ways we could utilize our existing infrastructure, so that obviously would save some costs. And it also was very valuable for training our staff in these various treatment processes. So out of the total 25 configurations that were evaluated in the BC, we looked at capital costs. We developed capital costs for all of those 25 configurations. We also looked at O&M and other operations and maintenance and other life cycle costs for all of the configurations. And then finally, we also looked at what we call non-economic benefits associated with those configurations. The non-economic criteria included such things as meeting regulatory requirements and the risk associated with meeting those requirements consistently. We looked at the possibility of future expansion, growth in our system, and how we could modify and expand our system. We looked at the operation and maintenance, staffing, automation, preventive maintenance. What were the costs and the workload associated with that? We looked at sustainability, both from an energy and environmental, even including odor control, because that's one of the things we want to make sure we really are on top of on this project. We looked at resiliency, the sorts of things that we look at in our water treatment plant project that's underway right now to make sure that we have the necessary redundancy within the system and within the different sites to provide us with the maximum amount of redundancy. And then we also looked at public impact. What would the impact be of this project on streets and neighborhoods? I know this is really hard to see, and so let me just tell you, trust me on this. The arrow on the left, that's the capital costs. The lower you are on this graphic, the lower your capital costs. The arrow on the bottom is non-economic benefit. So the farther you are to the right, the higher the economic benefit. When we plotted all 25 configurations in this kind of BCE capital cost evaluation, 2 came up as being clearly superior of all the other configurations. They had very low capital costs as they related to the other ones and very high non-economic benefits. But we didn't want to look at this just considering lower capital costs. We also wanted to look at total project costs. So not just the initial capital investment, but what are the long-term costs associated with running this thing for 40 years? The same 2 configurations came out ahead compared to the other configurations evaluated. The idea being that you may be able to reduce your capital costs, but in long term have higher operating costs, or you, with a little increase in initial capital costs, realize long-term operational savings. And fortunately for us, 2 of the configurations came out clearly as a winner, measured in both net present value and initial capital cost. So we came up with 2 configurations that we would like to bring forward for council to review and consider, and a recommendation. The first is the lowest capital cost scenario, and it's plant 2, that's the big existing treatment plant, using the A2O without side stream treatment that Patrick talked about. It includes collection system improvements, particularly a force main that comes out of one of our lift stations, plant 1 improvements, particularly on the headworks, grit removal and what have you, and no plant 5 improvements. We think that with a level 5, which is the highest, the most coarse preliminary type of cost estimates, level 5, we think that it's $344 million total project costs with a 40-year life cycle of $665 million. That's total costs after 40 years. The other one, which is very similar to the first one, is the same sort of configuration. The only difference being that it does have side stream treatment. Like Patrick was saying, it's a little more capital cost up front, but you recycle, instead of recycling that same waste over and over again through the entire treatment process, driving up your operating costs, you take it and you treat it separately in side stream storage, and that reduces your operating costs, which add up over time, but it's a little bit higher initial capital costs. That's our recommendation that we bring to council today. So as you can see, not a big difference in capital costs, 353 million versus 344, and 660 million lower operating costs than the 665. They're very close to each other. The good news is that in both of these, they're below the 355 million that was our CIP, that's programmed into our CIP. So this is a graphic of what we're talking about, the anaerobic anoxic treatment, A2O, common to both recommendations. And it's just basically showing the difference between what we're doing now and what we are planning on doing. And Patrick's here if you have some drill down questions on that. We're also going to be looking at the possibility of using as much of our Plant 2 infrastructure as possible, and also at the same time leave ourselves with the options of expanding and meeting new higher regulatory requirements and possibly changing demands on our system. I know this is absolutely impossible to read, but what I can tell you is those white rectangles that are in the center of the diagram, the three of them in a row, that's that A2O process that we were talking about. And those four circles that are in the middle, those are trickling filters that are presently offline and that we will be removing them. But that does leave 8 additional trickling filters, those other circles to the left, that we will be taking offline, but we won't be removing at this point because we may be able to make use of them. We're not done with our final design yet, and we also may want to mothball them for future enhancements that may be required to meet future requirements. And the other little white boxes that are down towards the bottom of the screen, those are the additional infrastructure components that we would be building. And again, Patrick's here if you have some specific drill down questions on that. So the recommended path forward that staff brings for your consideration is to proceed with the recommended Plant 2 improvements with side stream improvement, the second option that we presented. That the engineer and owner's advisor continue to pursue value-added engineering opportunities as the concept is further developed. We're at a point right now where we have a very preliminary concept-only design that we're presenting to you, but we need to do some additional engineering to get it to the state where it's ready to be represented in a letter of interest that we would submit to EPA in the form of for a WIFIA loan. That we would, the path forward is to continue to use the owner rep services to look for opportunities for value-added engineering so that we can drive the capital costs down. We want to make sure that the way that we proceed on this is open and transparent, and that we make sure that we maximize those opportunities to have a competitive selection process for design and construction. And we'd like to pay particular attention to helping encouraging local and emerging business participation, similar to what we're doing right now with the water treatment plant. We will continue that value-added engineering during the design phase, the next big phase, to identify reductions in capital costs, but do it in such a way that do not negatively impact life cycle costs. And as we go through that, we look to get help from the program steering committee, which we have. And that steering committee consists of Councilmember Tuttle, Councilmember Fry. We have a seat open now with Councilmember for District 3, Larry Pacinka with Spirit Aerosystems, Dan Warner with Doldy Hormel, and then a couple of staff members, Dante Martin and Mark Manning. And then we have staff from utilities to assist in that process. But as we look at major possible changes, significant changes as we go through the design process, we will be engaged with the steering committee to get guidance along the way. This is what the proposed timeline looks like The yellow circles at the bottom part of the chart represent when we will be coming back to council and looking for council action. So right now, we're in the concept and development phase to develop a letter of interest for the WIFIA funding. With the idea, and what we're bringing here, that bullet or that yellow dot that says concept approval, that's what we're doing here today. In the future, after a letter of interest is developed, we will be bringing it back to council and asking for approval to go ahead and submit it, and it'll reflect the additional design and value-added engineering that we hope to achieve. What we will then be doing is submitting that letter of interest, but we will want to make sure that it can't proceed the WIFIA funding notice. It could be as early as April. We'll be ready. We'll ask for your permission at that point. But if it lasts a little bit longer, our schedule has enough flexibility that even with a delayed WIFIA notice of funding, we can still fit this all within the timeline. We intend to, as soon as we get the letter of interest developed, to go out with a request for proposal for the rest of the design effort. That light blue bar there that says design, we will be bringing that RFP, the elements of that RFP forward to the steering committee for their review, with the idea that ultimately we're going to get to an LOI review process about 90 days. And at the end of that 90 days, we're hoping that EPA will say, go ahead and apply. An invitation to apply is pretty sure that we're going to go ahead and get the funding. That takes about a year then. Once we apply, we would be coming to the council again for a WIFIA loan approval, and that 1 year process where we submit and we negotiate with them the actual loan contract. Closely associated with that is an SRF loan of approval, which is the state version of WIFIA. It's the state revolving fund. We would also be coming back to council to be with construction contract approvals as they are developed. This is a review of what we've shown council already. The green line there shows what the combined rate increases each year. This is not the rate, but the rate increase each year. This is exactly consistent with what we've already shown council. So our efforts today show that we'll be able to meet our financial requirements if we get WIFIA and SRF with the same loan projections that we've shown council to date. There's a black line above it that shows what the national average is for annual rate increases. So this is based on the $355 million project cost, and it's also based on BNR being financed with WIFIA at 49% and the state revolving fund at 51%. So this is consistent with what we've already presented to council, no surprises here. The benefits of this investment may seem obvious. The regulatory compliance, something we can do. This project is not discretionary. It's not as though we can decide whether or not we want to meet BNR requirements. We have to. But it also improves the quality of the environment, particularly the environment along the river as it's discharged and downstream. It is a reinvestment in the water and wastewater infrastructure that we already have. It's at the end, more towards the end of its useful life. We'll be able to, at the same time we're meeting this requirement, also replace and renew some aging infrastructure. It does provide us with flexibility for future expansion. That was a very important consideration as we looked at this. And it also gets us in a timing and an approach that hopefully allows us to take advantage of a very low interest rate financing through the WIFIA and the SRF. And then finally, it gives us an opportunity to have some significant improvements to our odor control for that treatment plant. We also recognize the importance of a public outreach plan as we go through this. As this program progresses, we will be reaching out to focus on the building committee awareness of the need for these improvements and look for positive community impact messages for that, to also communicate our schedule, cost, and rate impacts. Let me emphasize again, we are looking for an approach that maximizes our competitive procurement on this project, and that maximizes how open and transparent it is, and that we will also be looking to have a continued engagement of the steering committee as we proceed with the project. So staff's recommendation, I know you thought we'd never get to this slide, right? City Council will provide direction to proceed with the recommended concept of the two that we presented to you, and that we proceed with the WIFIA LOI development. And that recommended concept, as you recall, is the one with a little bit higher capital costs with the side stream of storage or treatment and the lower ongoing operating costs. And with that, we can stand for any questions.
All right, are there questions or discussion from the bench? Vice Mayor Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. So, Alan, I'm glad to see council members on this and an open spot for the District 3 council member. I just want to clarify, this is design build that we're going forward with?
No, sir, this is design bid build. So we will be hiring a designer for phase 2 to design the project and to give us individual bid packages. But we will be looking for competition in that construction process by giving different packages out there and get individual competitive bids on those. So the way that we take advantage of the design build characteristics is that you have this value-added engineering. We believe that we've got that covered with the engagement of an owner's rep to help us during the design process. But this is a different kind of an approach. It's design, bid, build, with the idea that we maximize the competitiveness as we go to construction.
Okay, and the steering committee's helping with the RFP?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I just want to make sure, I know we had a little bit of changing paths with the water treatment facility, that on this, that we stay down the same path and we keep everything consistent. So glad to hear that.
Further comments from the bench? If not, I will turn it over to Century 2, where I think we have a couple speakers. Century 2.
Mayor, we have representatives who are here just if there are questions about this project.
Very good. Any other discussion about this project? Or questions for those who are here? Vice Mayor Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to throw this out again. Always supportive of going higher than the aspirational goal of 7% on minority and women-owned businesses. So the higher, the better, in my opinion.
Further discussion? If there is no further discussion on this, then I will make the motion to accept staff's recommended action to approve proceeding with the configuration 2.1 as the concept, WIFIA LOI, and other documentation included in the current project scope. Second. Motion has been made and seconded by the Vice Mayor. Clerk will open the roll. Members cast their vote. Members on the screen will give us a thumbs up or down. Looks like they both are a thumbs up, which means that the result is 6 yeas to 0 nays. Madam Clerk.
Wastewater Treatment Plant 2 final clarifier replacement.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. For the record, Don Henry, Public Works and Utilities. The item before you this morning involves the Plant 2 final clarifier project. We'll be looking for your approval to move forward with the final design and construction, as well as an adjustment to the final budget. Just take a moment on the background. Please recall in May of 2020, Council authorized the Phase 1 contract with Don Linger in a budget and amount of $3.3 million to move forward and develop the GMP and determine the requirements for the rehab. The plant has 6 of these final clarifiers. The project is moving forward with rehabilitation of 4 of them. This is critical infrastructure that's necessary to properly treat the wastewater It separates solids from the effluent in the final process and allows us to control the amount of solids that's wasted and what goes back into the treatment process to kind of fertilize the biological process. The fate of the other two clarifiers will be determined as design progresses on BNR, and the 4 rehabilitated clarifiers will continue to provide service through the life of the BNR project. The slide before you lays out the financial considerations for the project. I'd like to draw your attention first to the middle section in the top line, where it says available GMP funding in the amount of $3,194,235. As we move down the table, it lays out how phase 1 progressed. And after the initial, there was a base increase on the clarifier equipment itself, above what was estimated in 2016 on the original study. After the initial clarifier was drained down and engineers were able to get inside of the clarifier itself and take a look, additional deterioration of the concrete was discovered, requiring more repair than what was anticipated. Because of the extremely corrosive environment and the progression of the deterioration, it was determined that protective coating was called for this application. And then the scum baffles and weir, that's equipment that specifically allows us to control how much sludge is wasted and how much is returned back into the process. That equipment had deteriorated since 2016 beyond what was originally anticipated. And those were the drivers for the cost increase that we'll be asking for the budget adjustment. We did find savings through value engineer and market adjustments. Market adjustments are adjustments to the design fee and the general contractor's fee, as well as permitting fees and design review fees. Those were lower than what was anticipated. And then through value engineering, we found that the existing walkways that allow access to the clarifier drives could be repaired and reused rather than a full replacement on those. And then we moved to a different type of a rotating and uptake system for the solids. What was in place was a rotating spiral scraper mechanism. We're going to go with what's called an OVIVO system. It requires far less metal work, allows for a smaller gear drive mechanism and a smaller motor. And so when you take into account the added cost of the design progression and the savings, as well as the phase 1 design fee and the ongoing cost for staff oversight and construction inspection through the duration of the project, we wind up with a $200,000 shortfall. And so that's what's driving staff to seek the final adjustment to the budget in the amount of $3,500,000. And so we have funding to cover the budget adjustment through savings in a previous Plant 2 project where we rehabbed trickling filters and some other assets. We have savings to cover the increased cost, therefore there will be no impact to rates. Use of this funding will require a waiver of the policy regarding project savings, again bringing the revised requested budget to $3,500,000. So at this time, I'd like to close out the presentation and provide staff's recommendations to City Council to approve the budget by waiving the use of project savings policy and adopting the amending resolutions, approve the contract amount and the Phase 2 contract amendment with Donlinger Construction, and authorize all necessary signatures. Thank you for your consideration, and I'll stand for any questions that you have at this time.
All right, questions for staff? Councilmember Fry.
Thank you. Don, just how much more life do we expect with this fix on these clarifiers? In the Green Report, it said they're beyond the predicted useful life of 25 years. How many more years life do we think we'll get with this fix?
With the concrete repairs and the protective coating, we're expecting a 40-year life cycle on these assets with routine maintenance included.
Thank you.
Further questions or discussion? If there's none, then I will make the motion to take staff's recommended action to adopt the amending resolutions, waive city council policy number 2 regarding the use of project savings to allow the transfer of funds, approve the revised budgets, and authorize the necessary signatures. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and then seconded by the vice mayor. Clerk will open the roll. Members cast the votes. The result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Temporary employee professional services contract.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council. I'm Chris Bezruki, the HR Director. For your consideration and approval is a contract with Syndio for temporary staffing services. The contract provides the city with a consistent and efficient pricing structure and a process to meet our service delivery needs with temporary and emergency staffing when needed. This is a one-year contract. It is not to exceed $600,000 annually, and the funding will come from the current 2021 budget as we need the staffing. An RFP process was used. Let me walk you through the PowerPoint a little bit, hit some of the highlights there. When we talk about the efficiencies, that'll be the last bullet point. By not going through the recruitment process for an emergency hire, if you will, it is a temporary hire. That saves weeks of time. That will save potentially overtime if people don't want to work that as well. And then with regards to the liability, the temporary hiring agency would assume that liability, and then of course there would be no other pension costs or time off costs for the city. Over the years, we've used about 32 equivalent full-time positions throughout the year. That's not for the full year, but it'll be for periods within that time frame. So a request for proposal was issued late last year in November. 14 firms responded, and we chose Syndio. They've been with us for a number of years, and their services is very good, and their cost structure made sense to us, and there again would save us money as opposed to us going out and hiring. Okay. And with that, it is recommended that the City Council approve the vendor selection and the contract and authorize the necessary signatures.
Discussion on the item. Questions? There's no discussion or questions, then I will make the motion to take staff's recommended action to approve the vendor selection and contract and authorize the necessary signatures. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded by the vice mayor. Clerk will open the roll. Members cast the votes. Result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember appointments and comments.
Start off with appointments. Are there any appointments that council would like to make at this time? Councilmember Tuttle.
I don't have an appointment. I'm sorry, I have a comment.
Are there any appointments that council would like to make at this time? So we can get those out of the way. If not, Councilmember Tuttle, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind the community that it's cold outside and we have something to keep you inside and hopefully engaged and learn more about the city. We're going to have a town hall and places for people this evening. It'll be on land banks and 6 p.m. So I'm looking forward to learning more about land banks myself and participating. And you can learn more about the event at the City of Wichita Facebook page. So thank you. And also, I just want to say a special thanks to all of our staff who've done an amazing job, Public Works and Utility. I can hear them outside my window and my door doing their good work in this cold. And then also Police and Fire. I don't know if I've ever received as many emails from Chief Snow in the last 48 hours as we have, and just doing an amazing job, and appreciate everybody, getting out in the cold and potentially risking their own health to do what's best for the city. So thank you all to all city staff.
Other comments? See none. With that, I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Clerk will open the roll. Result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, the motion of adjourn passes. We are adjourned.